As in the previous two lessons, we'll start by creating a new Rails application at the command line, like this. Remember, it's Rails new. And as before, I want to put in a specific version number. So in this case, I'm going to put in 4.2.0 beta 2. In the previous two lessons, I used beta 1. But in fact, there is a slight subtlety. Things will still work if you use beta 1, but it won't be quite as smooth. So this is actually better. And I'll show you in a second what happens if you don't have this. This should be installed on your system because when you run bundle install on these guys, like the Hello app and the Toy app, let's look at the gem file. This line will force, actually it's beta 1, look at that. I think I did beta 2 here. Right. So this is beta 2. This has installed that Rails gem on the system. And so we can look at this gem list. If you do gem list Rails, it should confirm that 4.2, let's take a look at it, 4.2.beta, where is it? Here, point beta 2 is here, 4.2.0.beta 2. If that's not on your system, then what you should do is run gem install Rails-v. And at this point, you would then just rerun this this command, the new command. Let me show you what happens if you try it with a version of Rails that doesn't exist on the system. You can see, so you're just going to get an error like that. You try this. Again, you're going to get an error. So that's an indication that this version of Rails is not installed on the system. But it's working for us now. We actually do have a sample app here. And as before, you should not use this gem file or even the gem file I'm about to show you, but rather you should use the gem file from the URL I'm about to show you. And it is at sample, see if you can guess it based on the previous two lessons. It's at sample app gem file .railstutorial.org. So let's copy this and paste it in. Save it. Now, this is actually a gem file with every gem needed in the Ruby on Rails tutorial. Ordinarily, I would add gems incrementally, but for convenience in the screencast series, I'm going to just use this gem file from the very end. One thing worth noting is that there's actually a Ruby version right here. This might not work on your system. This has to match the Ruby version on your system. And the way you can check that is with ruby-v for the version. So this number here should match this number here. That's the one thing you might have to edit, because I can't predict what version of Ruby you might have. But once you've pasted this in, you can install the gems running bundle install. And again, we're going to do without production. That skips these gems here. Oh, right. So could not locate gem file. That's because if you look where I am, you can see I'm in tilde / workspace. This tilde is the home directory, which is /home/Ubuntu on this system. So I need to go into the sample app directory. Let me try that again. All right, everything's installed now. So as with the previous two applications, I'm going to do some of the basic overhead right at the beginning and just get it out of the way. So that includes putting this under version control with Git. Let's get an it and add everything. Add -A. Oops. And at this point, I do want to change the README. We didn't bother with the the toy app, but since this is now the real sample application, I want to change the README. So that's the readme.rdoc. Remember that from the first lesson. So the way to do that is to move it first. Before we did it on a different branch in lesson 1, but as I mentioned, in that case, I wouldn't ordinarily use a separate branch for something so simple. So let's move the README to a markdown version. That should change it over here. If it doesn't, then you can refresh it. Why did that work? There it goes. And let's just put in the top level heading. Let's put this on a different line just so it doesn't run across. You can see there's a very subtle, I don't know if you actually can see it, but there's a very subtle vertical line here indicating that we've gone too far. And I'm pretty rigorous about adhering to that convention. All right, so there's a README. We can take a look at that change. Get status. You can see that it's a renamed file and the modified. And so let's commit that change. And at this point, I would like to push it up to Bitbucket. So let's do that. Yep, need to log in. And let's create a new app here. This is the full sample app. Okay, create it. Actually, don't know if you can use Markdown in there. But Markdown is designed to be readable even if it's not being turned into HTML. Okay, I have an existing project. Oops. Why isn't that working? Huh, that's weird. It's actually not. I'm clicking on it and nothing's happening. I can do a hard refresh, see if that helps. That's really strange. That's really weird. It's actually not. It's not toggling. All right. Well, let's just use our awesome powers here. Inspecting it. And here are the getting started instructions. Here it is. Here's the get remote add we need. And then get push-u origin. Should work. Okay, let's refresh that. And there we go. Okay, so Markdown does not actually work here. Wait a minute. Why did this not work? So this is actually a different spot for Markdown. Oh, there's actually an error here, so let's fix that. Maybe you noticed that, and I did not, obviously. And actually, if you look here, the syntax highlighting tells us. You can see that this this part in here is not highlighted, but now it is. I think it's not highlighted here because it's broken across a line. Yeah. Let's say that. Maybe that's why I didn't notice. let's go back here, and there it goes. Good. All right, so now we've pushed our repository up to Bitbucket, and now I want to deploy this thing too. And to that end, I'm going to make the same hello world that we made in the last two lessons. The reason for this is basically because the default Rails page doesn't always work at Heroku. So it's hard to tell if the deploy worked. I do this in lots of contexts. Like when I'm writing a Ruby script, I'll just make a script that says put s hello world or something like that. We'll be talking about the put s command in the next lesson. It just prints a string out to the screen. I like getting started, just knowing that it's working. The application should always be working. Okay, so let's go to config routes. And let's see, where was it? It's here it is, root route. So it's the application controller. And hello. You can see that the IDE is actually completing some of these things if we do this here. You can just hit tab. I'll be using that a lot later in the tutorial. Okay, let's run a local server. And by local, I mean development. Just remember that if you're not using the Cloud IDE, you should just type Rails server. The other stuff, not only is it not necessary, but it actually won't work unless you define these variables, which are called environment variables. Oops, and again, I made the same error. It's now telling me, hey, I'm trying to create a new Rails app. Why didn't that work? And the answer is, well, I'm in the wrong directory. So let's cd into the right directory and just up arrow a couple times. And now that should work. All right, let's check that out, make sure it's working. It's weird, I'm not sure why it's asking me to sign in, but I can do that. All right, there we go. So it's working. Oh, I cleared my cookies. I think that's what happened. All right, so hello world. That's excellent. That's a good start. Just make those private. And now I want to deploy this to Heroku. Oh, let's commit that change, the hello change. So again, -am is all, and then the message is @hello. Let's create our Heroku app. Git push Heroku master, and then visit this here. Oops. I'll copy it at the end. By the way, you might notice there's a little warning here. There are actually a couple warnings. Don't worry about that. In fact, anything that's a warning you probably shouldn't worry about generally if it's not an actual error. But we will actually be fixing this up later in the tutorial, in lesson 7, I believe. All right, let's check it out, see if it's working. Oh, what's the URL? Here it is. There we go, hello world. All right, it's working. It's really important, I think, to deploy even at this early stage, because it's so easy just to go along and make bunches of changes and then wonder why it's not working in deployment. It's so much easier just to do it incrementally. All right, we can close this down. We can leave this up because we're going to be doing a lot of development locally.